welcome to you wherever in the world you are today. It's great to see you all sharing your locations in the chat. And actually, one of the benefits we hope you will get from this program is the ability to connect with your peers. So if you are looking to connect with others from your markets, then please put out that call in the chat. The chat is something that we use throughout our client experience webinars. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions, share thoughts, give us feedback, let us know what you're thinking. So please do the chat, use the chat as you are today. It's great to have you all engaged and using it already. So lovely to see people from really every corner of the world. If you're brave enough to go on camera and can face possibly doing it, it's a lovely thing, because it's always nice for us to actually see your faces. But also, if you're more comfortable keeping the camera off, that's equally fine too. I'm going to pass you over very shortly to Joanne Wakeford. Joanne will introduce herself, but for those of you that have seen her in action before, you can guarantee you're going to get lots of useful insight today. And if after this session you would like the slides, or indeed Joanne has also written a white paper, a guide on this topic that's available to you, then please do email us where you can always find us, cxprogram@dentons.com. So just drop us an email and then we'll know to forward these materials to you after the session today. Joanne, now over to you.
Thank you very much, Judith. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us from all around the world. So exciting to see. I hope you've got your cup of coffee and you're ready to get engaged for the next hour. As Judith said, my name is Joanne Wakeford, and I am Chief Client Officer with Dentons In-House Solutions. And we are a legal operations consultancy within Dentons, working with in-house teams all around the world to help them really optimize the way that they deliver legal services to the business. But before launching In-House Solutions in 2017, I led a team of about 50 professionals across Dentons. And I learned really quickly that marketing my department with dashboards and data and success stories and storytelling became really important to not only highlight our incredible contributions as a team, but it became key to sort of removing that black box around the function and securing additional resources like headcount and budget became a much easier conversation. So today I'm excited to be able to leverage those experiences to help guide law departments all around the world and how to tell their story and how to demonstrate their value. My background is actually in marketing and business development. It has become extremely helpful in this context. So I want you to just think about this approach as if you are marketing the law department, all right? That's sort of the phrase that we'll come back to. But why are we having this conversation today? And why is there so many of you who are interested in us having conversation? I've had conversations with hundreds of our GC clients, again, all around the world from different industries of different sizes. And the priority to demonstrate law department value has always been there for as long as I can remember. It's been surfacing as a pain point in many of these conversations. But now more than ever, law department leaders are looking at how to increase visibility around the function and really highlight how the department adds value back to the organization. You can see on the screen the results of a poll we actually conducted last month in our first CX program for the fall, which was focused on how to prepare for a business downturn. When we asked our audience, what are your operational priorities in the context of a recession or a downturn? The majority of respondents highlighted demonstrating our team's value. You can see that this is above things like cost cutting or defending the budget. So this has certainly become a priority. I actually was fortunate enough to do a session on a different topic yesterday it was. Ran the same poll, same results came up. And this is certainly a relevant conversation. So why is this so important though right now? Why is this a hot topic? The law department, as you all know, needs to be in line with other corporate functions when demonstrating value, particularly when it comes to a bit of a competition for scarce resources. There's a finite pot available. So making sure that you are demonstrating what you bring to the table is important now more than ever. The best defense is a good offense, right? So instead of waiting for the C-suite, the CFO, CEO, whomever to come to you asking for you to either defend your budget or maybe just arbitrarily cut costs, let's start looking at what we can do now to get ahead of that conversation and to really begin to own your own data and own your own story and your own narrative. So before we get started, I'm going to run a quick poll. Just would love to hear from everyone on the call today as our first poll question. Which of the following best describes the maturity of your function? Would you say, we've got this, don't worry about it, we've got plans, we've got KPIs, we've got metrics, we've got tech, we've got process, we've got everything. Move over, Joanne, let me do this call. If that's the case, happy to hand the mic. Maybe you're a bit of a work in progress where you know that this is definitely something you got to find some time to do. Maybe you're chipping away at it one by one. Maybe you're starting to think through that strategic plan. Maybe you're starting to think through how to start to demonstrate your value. Or perhaps you're just at the very beginning of your journey, which means that perhaps you haven't really had a chance to think about it. The reality is we do know that there's a very small corner of your desk where this can sit. There's the demands of the day-to-day, the expectation, the business still goes on. How do you find the time to do that? Completely understand if that's the case. So hopefully everybody can take a moment to jump in and share your views on this topic. We're going to have a couple more poll questions throughout the session, so I look forward to seeing everybody jump in. All right, I will end the poll and share our results. Glad to see we've got the majority of people are a work in progress. That's fantastic to hear, and others at the start of the journey. And many of you out there, if you've got this, please jump in and share your ideas in the chat. Jump in with thoughts or views. Maybe you disagree with me. Jump in there as well. So would love to hear your thoughts there. All right, so again, even I think in our promotion of this event, we talked a little bit about how there's this sometimes a perception that the law department can be perceived as the department of no, or maybe you've even heard the expression necessary evil. What really drives this perception? It comes down at the end of the day to the brand of the law department, right? Like brands of companies, brands of products, of organizations or people. It's what people think of or feel when they think of the law department. It's driven by all the interactions and experiences that they have with you and your team. The phone calls, if anybody still calls, emails, work product, meeting discussions, video calls, in the elevator, if you're in the office, all of those interactions. And like any brand, if you aren't actively managing it, someone will fill that void with their perceptions. And so that often is where sort of some of these negative perceptions comes from. A lot of these challenges and negative perceptions can sometimes also be the communication, right? How are you integrated with the business? What is the communication like? Is it frequent? Or perhaps it's not as strong, and that sort of connection isn't as strong. Another area we're starting to see more and more is just this lack of understanding of the role of the legal department. What is it that you're here to do, and what role do you serve for the business? Those who may not be familiar with how the legal department functions may not necessarily understand why you can't do things that they want you to do, and sometimes that leads to that negative perception. Of course, things like service and experience and quality and speed, because we all know it was supposed to be done yesterday or 3 days ago, sometimes unrealistic expectations there. But sometimes there might even be factors that are completely out of control that are influencing that perception, things like budget and resources. So that might limit your ability to respond effectively. But with law departments around the world, maybe you've heard this expression as well, but increasingly expected to operate like a business within a business, I'm suggesting taking a bit of a mindset shift in terms of how you perceive your relationship with other business units and your internal customers. So for example, as a business, you'll have customers, of course, you've got your internal customers, and you have something that your customers want or need. And as a business, you need to understand whether your customers are satisfied with that offering. So you need to talk to your customers. You need to learn as much about what's driving their needs and their behaviors and what they want, or in the context of your internal clients, their priorities. As a business, if your customers aren't satisfied with that offering, you need to adjust. You need to make improvements. You also want to make sure that your customers are interacting with you and your law department brand, which leaves a positive impression, one that will encourage others to use your services. Ultimately, you want to make sure you promote yourself, right? Reinforce why they should use you, come back to use you. You want your internal customers to become your ambassadors or your advocates. Maybe they might say, oh, you have to go talk to so-and-so in legal. They are absolutely going to help you with this. I can't imagine doing anything without them in the room next to me. But above all, you'll want to report on your contributions to your stakeholders, just as you would if you were a business. Now, looking at it through this lens can sometimes be a helpful perspective when we talk about demonstrating your value and your contributions. So let's talk a little bit about the roadmap to get there. This is going to serve as our agenda for today. I'm often asked by clients and other law department leaders, how do we promote our department to the business? Should we do commercials? Should we maybe start podcasts or newsletters or emails or open houses or all these fun things? And the answer is absolutely, that sounds like a lot of fun, but let's not start there. The process, as I see it, is really about, in the first instance, starting with your customers, understanding what the customers want. Do you understand what the business and your internal customers expect from you? Are you aligned with their priorities and their expectations? Do you understand what might be working well, maybe what might not be working so well? And then from there, fixing what might not be optimal, right? So telling your customers how great you are while not acknowledging or necessarily correcting the pieces that are frustrating is not going to be helpful. So spend some time to understand what might not be working, what might be broken. And that's your first step to, again, demonstrating a responsive and a customer-centric department. Of course, data is key, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we want to leverage whatever data you can get access to in order to be able to report on your progress and your momentums. But sometimes without the proper infrastructure or tools, it can be cumbersome, right? If you don't have the tools in place, how do you get access to the data? Which is why you shouldn't stop there. Thinking about how do you build and create a narrative to reinforce your value that can be reinforced by data, but also becomes a bit of a communication plan, a bit of a roadmap for what stories are you going to tell, what narrative are you going to tell, and to whom. So again, this serves as a bit of an outline for today. We're going to start first about talking with our customers, our stakeholders. So the number one step in achieving a customer-obsessed or a customer-focused culture is talking to the customer. Number one, nearly 70%, I think the number is 68% of chief legal officers interviewed for the Association of Corporate Counsel 2022 survey indicated that they almost always meet with internal stakeholders to discuss operational and risk issues. This number is actually down 8 points from 2020. So really important to think about whether or not you're continually doing that, being mindful and programmatic about your interactions with internal stakeholders and customer. And that's how you stick to it, right? Because often it's like, well, I can't deal with that today because I've got too many other things to deal with. And it's not just at the CLO level. This should be throughout your department. Everyone in everyone in the law department, making sure they're aligned. But this is one of the most direct ways to ensure alignment with the business and really start to demonstrate your position as a strategic partner. Not only will help to shape your direction, but then you can start to anticipate what their needs are, right? So starting to have those conversations. And if you haven't had them yet in this way, now is a good time just to establish a baseline. So think of a handful of really important key internal stakeholders across your organization and have these conversations with them in terms of, what is their level of satisfaction in the first instance with the law department? What insights do they appreciate from you? What roles and competencies do they value most? Do they feel that your team really understands their business unit priorities? That's a really good question to ask. And if not, what can you do to align against that? Asking about how can you improve client service? All this kind of feedback probably might be sometimes a little difficult to hear, but will give you insights into where you can streamline and further optimize your function to start getting rid of some of those pinch points. And then, of course, asking what their top priorities are. Now, 3, 6, 12 months is a very long time frame, particularly right now. If you have those conversations right now and asking questions around what their top priorities are, please don't do that just once. You're going to want to come back to that question on a regular basis. Is Project X still in sight? What's happened to Project Y? Really understanding what those priorities are and staying in touch with them on that. And then, of course, asking questions like, what impediments do you foresee in accomplishing those goals, and how can legal help? Now, really important to think about using these kinds of conversations as not just a way to collect the feedback, but to really demonstrate your effort to build that relationship. So either bring somebody with you to these conversations to take notes or record the discussion, make sure you send these questions in advance or whichever questions you plan to use, so that they have time to prepare, and really truly listen effectively. That's where that relationship starts to build. Try to avoid distractions, confirm your understanding, play back what you've heard. Again, why does this matter? Because taking the time to speak with your most important internal stakeholders moves you towards that alignment with the business. It has a tremendous impact on the relationship. I have seen it firsthand. I have seen it where GCs and their VPs are that connection grows because of that demonstration to wanting to do things better. Now, of course, the benefit of having these conversations with your stakeholders now is if there is any change that needs to take place in the future, they're being cited on it, they're being sort of brought in and informed that things might be done differently. And this isn't just a one-way conversation, right? This is an opportunity for you in turn to share what else legal is working on. What are your priorities? Talk about your success stories and recent wins. We're going to talk a little bit more about the idea of sharing your success stories, but think about this as a two-way conversation. And again, don't just have this conversation once, particularly around the priorities. It's a good way to maybe even think about establishing key accounts or relationship managers on the legal team who are even physically situated next to the business is a good way to make that connection and better align. Again, no better way to stay in touch with the customer than to continually talk to the customer. Now, feedback surveys are something that many law departments have done and still do in terms of the questions that I just shared. You could probably do that by an online survey, much more effective to do it in person. But how do you constantly get regular feedback? One way to look at doing this is to leverage the Net Promoter Score system, which was developed by Bain & Company. It's a proprietary method. You're probably familiar with it. Many companies use this as well, but it allows you to gauge customer feedback and loyalty. So for example, you could simply embed the question in your email signature, asking on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us to others in the organization? And of course, coming up with that hard number, that an NPS score is a good way to demonstrate your progress and your performance as a department. So simply done by taking away the people who scored you from 0 to 6 from the people who scored you from 9 to 10 on that scale. So it's just one way to do it. Sometimes the longer surveys can be difficult to measure responses apples to apples because it depends who's responding, depends if they had a bad day. So really think about using something that might be a little bit more structured. Now, you've gone through the exercise of aligning with a department. That's become ingrained in the way in which you operate as a department. Now it's time to think about, all right, what are we going to do to really design this responsive function? And if you had a chance to join me last month, we talked a little bit about strategic planning. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we're going to focus in the context of operational improvements, right? Law departments grow quickly, sometimes without consideration to how the business will interact with you or the legal needs. Sometimes processes are formed on the fly, documents might not be centralized or available, and the way in which the work is sent to the department might not be tracked and triaged. All these operational elements can sometimes come together, in pieces, and that's okay. Progress takes time. Don't forget, this is an evolution. Nobody's expecting you to have this. We've got this. Although there are some people on the call who we've got this, so that's great to hear. But how do you take a step back and understand how can we design a legal function that is responsive to the business and delivers value? In the first instance, and you've started this already by having those conversations, is to have a full picture of your current state. What insights can we gather about our performance? What insights can we gather about the pain points? Not only talking to your key internal stakeholders, but thinking about talking to your legal team as well. From there, putting together a SWOT analysis, and the SWOT, or whatever tool you decide to use, is just a way of getting an executive summary of your current situation, right? It is a way to determine your gap analysis between where you are now and where you want to be. And it starts to become a bit of your roadmap as well. Another area of relevance, especially in departments that have grown really quickly, law departments, or in organizations that have grown really quickly is to define your role as a function. What is it that you'll be spending your time on, and what will you not be doing? This starts to set a benchmark or a precedent for how you'll interact with the business and with each other. It sort of becomes your guiding principles. But again, making sure that the business understands that role and that function is key, particularly if, again, it's fast growing. So from there, again, building some high level top goals or big rocks, what is it that you'll be focusing on? Once again, they should align back to corporate priorities. And of course, through this process and as you're starting to think about your operational plan, there are no doubt going to be dozens and dozens of opportunities for you to focus on, but you'll need to prioritize. You'll need to start thinking through, all right, what are the projects that we want to focus on that will drive the greatest benefit to us in the organization, and perhaps not that complex to deliver. So spending some time as a team and walking through that exercise is helpful. And then, of course, once you've had that conversation, you've nailed down priorities, you can start to put together your roadmap. Again, everything up to this point is relatively easy. It's the execution and the implementation of some of these projects. So don't exhaust yourself through this first part of the project. If you want to know a little bit more about strategic planning, again, visit us on our Denton's website. Excuse me. And there's a client experience tab at the very top of the website, and you can get access to the recording from the last session there as well. So again, in this context, you might be focusing on legal operations, which is essentially the discipline of looking at how to optimize the law department, how to optimize the way in which you deliver legal services to the business, looking at the cross spectrum of your people. Are your people doing the right things? Are they focused on their highest and best use? Does the org structure fit the organization's needs? Are your processes streamlined, or is there more that can be done there? And of course, technology, what's out there, what's fit for our purpose. I want to talk a little bit about what kind of trends we're seeing as well in terms of legal operations, to give you an insight of what might be opportunities for you to focus on. But according to the ACC, once again, and their 2022 survey, 70% of chief legal officers interviewed indicated that legal operations was going to be their #1 strategic priority. This is up from less than 40% last year. In that same survey, I think 60% indicated that they have at least one person responsible for legal operations. So looking at this as an opportunity to really optimize, again, helps to streamline the integration with the business and really moves you towards highlighting that value. So just thought I'd touch briefly on a couple of those trends. What do we expect we might see in 2023? I think certainly in the context of a potential recession, what does that mean? I think certainly looking at spend is going to be obviously important, regardless of whether you want to look at it or not. In the first instance, understanding what your spend is, that can sometimes be a challenge. We'll talk a little bit about how you can do that. But looking across your internal resources, are they optimized? Are the right people doing the right work? Understanding what work you're doing so that you can have that analysis. And then again, looking, I think, at external counsel and understanding whether or not there's more value that can be gained there. I think more and more in-house departments are going to be conducting convergence programs, really trying to understand how to get greater value from their law firms and from law firms that can serve their global needs as well. There will continue to be a focus on people. We are a people business, and that will be the reality, regardless of what, if it's the great transition or the great resignation or the big quit, whatever the phrase, people will be looking to support their teams and understanding where potential lack of engagement might be, what's causing that, really focusing on creating that inclusive culture. And then again, looking for professional development opportunities for their team. And if budgets are limiting, I think they'll be turning to their law firms for that, which is great that Denton's has the CX program, which is able to serve your needs there. But I think in the absence as well or not the absence of, but if revenue starts to become a little bit more tight, I think without question, now is a great time for the legal department to begin to look at how to optimize that contracting function. Right? What stands between making money for the organization? Sometimes that cycle can be slow, it can be complicated. So spending the time now to look at your contracting life cycle will be key, so that when things do come back online, as they say, that that function is streamlined, it's moving very quickly. But above all, I think using every opportunity to highlight law department value and contributions that will continue to certainly play a significant role. So let's talk a little bit about metrics and data. I've given a number of these presentations back when we used to do them in person as well. And usually somebody would raise their hand and say, no, I don't have to report on metrics. And that's just not a conversation I even want to start. And fair enough, I get it. But let me just take a moment to highlight the value in thinking through having some metrics to report against. I mentioned earlier my experiences in leading the department. Having some data to report against brings transparency to what you're working on. How much time is it taking? Who is doing it? How much does it cost? Right? It removes that black box around the function. And again, if there's no transparency, that perception, that brand automatically goes to a place where you don't want it to be. Having metrics, importantly, they're there to drive action. They're there to drive some kind of result, right? So thinking through what is that result that you're trying to achieve, and even being able to hold people accountable to certain projects. So if you think through that plan, that operational plan that you put together in terms of where you might optimize your function, you might decide to align individuals on your team to be accountable for certain roles. So that's where the performance and the metrics against those particular projects can align against that accountability. But really, metrics help to drive decisions and provide insight into trends. So for example, if you are reporting on an increased volume of work in a department in one particular area, and that type of work would lend itself well to maybe automation or maybe some more education in a particular area or some self-help, right? So getting insight into that will illuminate where there's opportunities to improve. It also provides some objectivity. It's hard to argue with stats. So whether it's about your performance or whether it's about the work or the spend. And again, it really does help support the discussion around budget and resources, particularly if you're able to use some of that data to benchmark against others, to demonstrate that comparison. So put simply, metrics are there to drive actions and results and to help sort of provide some illumination into the department. So the most important thing to keep in mind when thinking about metrics is that if it doesn't matter to the business, it shouldn't matter to the legal department, right? So what you're reporting on needs to be relevant to the business. And you need to start with what is the overall objective? What action or result are you hoping to drive with this reporting? If it's something like the big change transformation project, maybe you want to start that contract optimization. Thinking about what data can you collect about contracts, the volume, the type, how long is it taking, whatever access to data you can collect there. Maybe it's things you just want to highlight your overall performance and improve visibility. So maybe it's things like that Net Promoter Score, your spend, the work type, the time it takes. And then thinking through who's the audience for this information and what do you want them to do with it, right? So your CFO might not want to know necessarily about your Net Promoter Score as much as spend and cost savings. So think ultimately about who you intend to target with this information. Now, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, getting access to data is the challenge. That's why I can't demonstrate the need for more resources because I can't find the data. So be realistic about what you can get access to and start there. Spend is an easy place to start. But really think about it as an evolution, and the more evolved your operations become, you'll get greater access. So even thinking through work type or kind of requests for coming into the department. Many law departments just simply set up an inbox, legal requests at companyname.com. It's having someone on your team that can track and triage that information. Just starting to catch a little bit more information, and it doesn't have to be perfect. This is a bit of art and science, okay? So if you don't have access to that information, if you don't have the email address set up to collect it, maybe just start asking the team, what occupies the bulk of your time? And how much percentage of your time would you say you spend doing that? So again, just simple ways to get to where you need to be. And also think about this as not just quantitative. Hard numbers and facts are awesome. I'm all in favor, though, of thinking about how do you incorporate stories and case studies into your reporting? Again, the data is going to support that narrative, but that narrative is just as important as well. And of course, I mentioned benchmarking earlier. What access to resources can you get that will allow you to demonstrate where you sit vis-a-vis others? Lots of great associations like the Association of Corporate Counsel or the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium have benchmarking data and surveys. They'll show you department size versus revenue. They'll show you type of different roles in different departments. So think about what you can access there. And Major Lindsay in Africa, I believe, have some salary data. So there's lots of information that you can collect out there. Just take a look to see what might be available. And of course, this might be obvious, but the whole point of collecting data is to share this with others. So don't just go through this exercise and then be very limited with how you share it. Think about sharing this with your team to keep them engaged and motivated. But ultimately, you're tracking these things too, right? So it's not just a one exercise and done. The whole point is to track this to see that you're showing progress and momentum. All right, poll number 2. Love to hear from you. One moment while I pull this up. If you currently collect data and or report on metrics, is it driving any particular outcome for you? And I ask this question because I do often think that sometimes it can be easy to start to collect vanity metrics, we call them, and just start to report on things because it's easy to collect the information and it's starting to show some maybe transparency into what the team is doing. So maybe even things like number of meetings or I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but things that don't drive any other insight or illumination. Number of meetings might just tell you you're spending too much time in meetings, which is probably something you can assess on your own. But again, thinking about how you can collect this information and make sure that it's actually driving a particular outcome. So if you haven't had a chance, please jump in on the poll. Love to get your feedback and your insights there. It looks like we're sort of trending a lot on the not sure side, which is a fair point because how do you know if it's driving any results or action if you're not actually seeing that action firsthand? So that can be fair. I think thinking through again, what it is that you're reporting on, what is your objective is really important. So we'll give it a few more seconds here before we close the poll. All right, if you haven't had a chance to jump in, please do. We're going to close the poll here in just a few seconds. I think we're pretty split, Judith. I think there's we're almost at a draw. I feel like we're coming to the point where it's almost down the middle. So I'm going to give it a few more seconds. Anyone else want to jump in who has a different view? Love to hear that. All right, we're almost there. A few more votes, please, and then we'll close the poll. All right, I think I'm gonna close it, Judith. All right. Thank you, everyone. Almost split down the middle. It's incredible. I apologize, there's a cold going around the house. So split down the middle, yes and no, not sure. Really, good to give some consideration again as you walk into this process where you might sit there. So thank you very much for participating. I appreciate it. So just to give you a sense of what some sample KPIs might be, once you have that data, access to that data, you can leverage it to tell whatever story you want to share. And this is just simply a snapshot of what might be available to report against. Again, this might be a couple of good examples if you want to report against your overall performance. So for example, if spend is something that you can get access to, either through maybe your finance partner, trying to understand how much that is, you can report spend against revenue, you can report spend actual versus budget, you can look at spend against strategic priority, and then also thinking about that work volume, right? Starting to draw some kind of insights into where is that work coming from? Are there particular departments that are using you more than others? Are there particular geographies that are using you more than others? Again, all of this done to be able to draw some insights. Again, it's not just about learning about what metrics to report. Again, it's about learning what action you can take from this. I also mentioned earlier the idea of taking a bit of a narrative approach to some of this report. So highlighting your strategic priorities progress, highlighting maybe some case studies, maybe there were some lessons learned from a particular project. Again, thinking about what it is that you want to achieve and what do you want your audience to focus on. Again, lots of different ways to report on metrics. One thing I would warn you against is having too many metrics. But thinking through as well. So if you can get access to some data from your own internal function, your finance partner, think about as well, what can your law firms do to help? Law firms have access to data and can provide you with insight into your work with them that will help supplement the data that you pull internally as well. So they can report on spend. They can report on spend against types of matters, against location or geography, outcomes of those matters. Obviously, diversity metrics. And if that's relevant to your organization, that's something that you might expect from your law firm to report against as well. And of course, efficiency of those matters. What was, maybe like a red, yellow, green approach to it. But don't forget, thinking more broadly beyond you and your department in collecting the data, who else can support you through this process? I think this is one of my favorite quotes in this context, certainly. Most people use statistics like a drunkard uses a lamppost, more for support than elimination, as said by Mark Twain. But really, that's a really important point to think about this. If you're collecting matrix, don't just have them for the sake of it. What result are you trying to accomplish? What objective are you trying to achieve? Having too many metrics can drown out the point. And again, not really using them as a way to understand what improvements can be made. I also want to reinforce the point about don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. This can be a little bit of art and a little bit of science sometimes blended together. So, and that's where we talk about only using metrics to tell your story. There are much broader ways that you can tell your story beyond just using metrics as well. So thinking about how do you leverage that narrative piece I was talking about on top of that data. And that's where I get really excited, because I love to talk about the marketing piece, that the way in which we can be just a little bit more creative, just a little bit more bold in the way in which you tell your story. If you think about it, your corporation, all corporations would have some kind of marketing strategy and communications plan. And as law departments are increasingly asked to operate like a business within a business, right? This might be an opportunity and a huge advantage for those law departments who really want to highlight their contributions. And again, thinking of yourself as that business. I often speak with law department leaders who are just frustrated that they have metrics and they're reporting on that at a leadership level, but the broader business just doesn't understand, or they don't really appreciate your role and your value. Again, the part about your role is really important. What are you here to do? And how do you do it? And what should that expectation be? You might find that you have customers that come to you who never worked with you before, so they don't know what role you serve. Again, the one thing I'd like to share, and I'm sure that you realize the case, that the business is not going to ask you how great you are. I mean, they might ask you in the context of report on metrics, please share your data. But this is about stepping beyond what you feel comfortable with to some degree, and thinking about how can you start to market yourself and your team. It might feel a bit transactional to broadcast your successes, but again, you're thinking about it in the context of what works for you, what's appropriate for your culture, what's appropriate for your organization, but just thinking a little bit differently in the way in which you want to share some of the information about the work that you do. Now, this is going to be sort of like, if we were thinking about Goldilocks, like the too hot, too warm, too cold, this might be the too hot porridge category. This is the high end version of what a potential communications plan could look like. A plan really is just an opportunity for you to just think through mapping out your tasks and begin to align some responsibilities. This is absolutely not necessary. Again, this is probably the higher end approach, and appreciate that you might not have time to focus on this. Give me a call if you want some help. I'm happy to support you with this. But really the plan should focus on what are you communicating and why? What are you trying to achieve? Again, what is that desired outcome? Who is your audience? How will you communicate and reach your audience? What channels are available to use? You're probably in competition with a lot of noise, a lot of other departments talking about internal communications. So thinking about where there might be a way for you to create a bit of white space in your organization. Thinking about what format will you use. Might you use something different, like some videos or some podcasts? But importantly, how will you measure success around all of this? I put together, this is a sample plan based on what your strategic plan might be for 2023. So congratulations, you've put together your strat plan. Having it sit on your desk or on your team is not as good as sharing it with others. So what can you do to highlight, your road ahead, how you're going to get there, how you're going to report against that? So thinking again, in this case, your goal is to demonstrate your team's alignment with the organization and really enhance awareness of your performance against those priorities. And again, looking at the different audiences for this kind of information for your C-suite and your business unit leaders. Again, data is going to be great to leverage here, concrete examples that drive that really hard evidence of your performance. So maybe you've got your strat plan on a page, maybe it's a nifty little infographic. Maybe you've got dashboards that you can report out against, using your one-on-one time to talk about what you're progressing against on your plan, or even top-line press releases. If you're thinking about the broader internal customer, maybe things like having an open house, whether that's virtual or in person, an opportunity to highlight how you're progressing against your goals, what those goals are. Getting live feedback during that process will be helpful for you to really demonstrate that you're listening. Apologies. And then thinking through, maybe what else could you do? What other content can you create? Maybe some meet the team videos, or even a meet the team session, allowing everyone an opportunity to highlight what they do. What problems do they solve within the organization? Lots of different ways that you can think creatively about getting more insight into what it is that you do. Maybe even a lessons learned series. Talk about the problem that you solved. Again, thinking through what's appropriate and relevant in your organization. The other thing I wanted to talk about, because I find this certainly in my case as well, when sometimes you get greater attention when you do things externally, right? So thinking through maybe what external awareness can you start to create? Are there industry awards that you can apply for, or have your law firm nominate you for? Are there speaking opportunities that you can start to gain profile and build your own profile? Podcasts. I have a podcast. If anybody would love to be interviewed, I'm happy to spend some time with you and talk through that. Really just sometimes thinking about building that brand of your legal team externally as a center for best practice or innovation can do a lot internally as well. So thinking through what that might look like. Now, that doesn't have to be the case or the situation for everybody. Sometimes maybe you might just want to take a little bit more of a streamlined approach. Maybe thinking through, okay, we've got 3 or 4 messages that we want to share this year. Maybe that's your goals for 2023. Maybe you're going to focus on some legal trends or some observations. Maybe this year is the year that you want to conduct this transformation project. What does that look like? Maybe that's, a key theme. Whatever it is, thinking through approaching this in a bit of a campaign. So you've got your key messages, now thinking through what tactics are we going to do to be able to share information around those key messages, and just make it a rinse and repeat sort of program, right? So you're going to do the same thing for each of these key messages. And of course, you're going to have multiple audiences, but think about how you can reuse some of that content. So if you put all the time and effort into creating a video, for example, maybe you decide you want to cut pieces of that into an audio podcast or snippets into another email. I know this sounds like, oh my gosh, how am I going to have time to possibly do this, Joanne? I get it. But think creatively about the resources that are available to you through your organization. Think about maybe people on your team who might have a special writing capability, who may want to spend some time or do podcasts on the side. Sometimes these projects are an important stretch opportunity. And I would also add, think about asking your law firms for support as well. They obviously have access to resources like this that can help you. Now, if all of that still feels overwhelming and you're still like, Joanne, I don't know if I can do this. This is a lot. I got a lot on my plate. Let's just stop and think about what everyone can do, regardless of the size of your department. If you're the department of one, or if you have multiple people. How do you make sure that you're telling your story about your contributions and value, both as an individual and as a collective department. So maybe you've got a bit of a functional sort of departmental narrative. What are you going to do at the individual level? So think about this. When's the last time you were on a call, video call maybe, and a colleague or an internal client asks you, how are things? What's going on? And your response was, oh, it's just so busy. It's just super busy. And it's very busy. Again, you probably did the hand gesture, and maybe you tossed your head back, and sometimes feels all very cathartic to do. And we get it, I get it, we've all been there. But those few minutes before that video call started, when you were just sort of catching up, chatting, when you waited for others to join, that was a lost opportunity to highlight your individual and your collective value. And here's why. From every email you write to the 5 minutes before that video call starts, or if you're in the office, the 5 minutes in the elevator, actually that would be a very long elevator ride now that I think about it, but every interaction that you have with others is an opportunity to shape and form your value proposition, right? Just like companies and products, people have a value proposition. It's the specific attributes or characteristics that help to describe what makes you unique. It's describing what makes you or your department completely indispensable. And if you think about it, if you've got everybody on the team talking about what makes you indispensable, it becomes a hard argument against, right? This is called personal branding. And a brand, again, just like the law department, individuals on your team will have a brand. It's what others think, feel, or experience when they see you or when they see your name on a page. And everyone has a personal brand. It's just about how you manage it effectively. We do personal branding workshops for clients and do them internally as well. And we talk about really understanding what your goals and aspirations are, along with what is your unique value proposition. What is it that you do differently than others? Or put it differently, what problems do you solve, right? And help them to begin to craft a narrative around that, supported by evidence or examples. The evidence is really an opportunity to reinforce it. It's like the data point that I was talking about earlier. You're telling your story, but you've got a data or an example. Now, the goal of doing these kinds of workshops is to really give you a sense around, what is your personal brand? What is it that makes you unique? What do you want to be known for, right? So what do you want to be known for as an individual and as a department? But again, really to equip you with the language that allows you to introduce yourself, to highlight your role, highlight your contributions, and again, using every opportunity or every interaction like it's your most important interaction. It's a mindful approach. It's being purposeful about those interactions and taking the time to do it. It's far too easy to just take those few minutes in the Zoom call to talk about how busy we all are. A few years ago, I remember talking to a new GC about the idea of personal branding and how important it was to communicate your successes and the windows that you have. Because again, it shapes and forms, their impression of you. And I said, look, next time you run into a VP in the hallway or another stakeholder, just take a moment to just highlight what you and the team might be working on. Maybe a recent success or how a project's going. Well, no kidding, the very next day she called to say she did the exact same thing and what an impression it had made. So thinking through, again, being mindful about that. Also thinking through, again, how can you really begin to embed the team? That allows for greater interactions. Maybe it's physical proximity, again, if you're in the office. If not, coming up with a list of coffee catch-ups. When COVID first hit, I came up with my list of my friends and family list of fellow Denton's colleagues who I wanted to make sure I was in touch with on a regular basis, who I can help them and in turn they can help me. But it was really just being mindful about that, because I probably wouldn't have done that had I not actually come up with that list. So come up with a list of your internal stakeholders. Who is it that you and your team want to be in regular touch with? And using that as an opportunity to start to build advocates and ambassadors around the business, to get them to really begin to share that message about how great you and the team are, in addition to the great work that you're doing. So welcome any questions in the chat as we sort of come to a bit of a close on our time together. But just in terms of a bit of a wrap up, I want you to just take a step back and think again about that mindset shift. Thinking again about if we were to be, if our little law department or our big law department were to be a business, what should we prioritize and focus on? How do we start talking to our customers to start to build that, almost that customer-centric or customer-focused mindset, right? So really thinking about moving in that situation from just a transactional nature to more of a sort of a connected colleague. Be as visible as you possibly can be. Again, whether that's Zoom or in the office, whatever's video service, be visible and approachable, be open to conversations. I once had a question around how do we balance the need for automation versus how do we still have that personal level? And the answer is you need to do a little bit of both. Having that personal contact is easier if you're not spending time doing some of that less strategic work. You can actually have more strategic questions and conversations with your stakeholders. Again, thinking about, even in the context of a potential recession, what can you do as a department to start to build that responsive department, to start to address some of those pain points and some of that friction that's there. There's much that can be done without significant investment. Even if you're thinking about technology, think about your process improvements before you even touch technology, right? Because otherwise you're just automating a bad process. So thinking through, even once you start to talk about technology, what exists across the department or the organization that you can already leverage, right? Rather than necessarily investing in new at this point. But don't hesitate to think about that operational improvements. And of course, using data to tell your story, but it's only part of it. You know, what is the narrative that you can use to support that? And above all, what can you do to really start thinking about marketing the law department? So welcome any questions if there are any. Otherwise, I will maybe turn to Judith as we leave that open-ended question available. After we do our last poll, I nearly forgot one more poll to do, everyone, before I let you go. Thank you for participating. This is the last poll that we have is, what is the status of your strategic planning process? Have you started it already? Is it completed? Are you already done? Maybe you're just thinking through, how do we even get started on this process? In which case, if you haven't got started, or if you're asking what's a strategic plan, two very good questions. Visit the webinar that we conducted earlier. I think we also have, I know we have it because I wrote it. We have a white paper around strategic planning as well. And we have slides from those sessions. So we welcome you to jump in there. It looks like we've got a lot of people focused on getting this underway, which is fantastic to hear. Now is a good time over any other time to think about your strategic plan. As you head into a potential recession, what is it that you need to do to understand what's the roadmap going to look like ahead? What do we need to do as a team to focus on to get ourselves in order? So that's fantastic to hear. We're going to give everyone a few more seconds to respond. And then I promise we will let you out of the Zoom call in time. A few more responses from the team, and then we'll close the poll.
While everyone is responding, I should also make it clear, because everyone has been asking for slides today and your white papers, Joanne, so you'll be pleased to know that. But also on the link I shared for the client experience section of the dentons.com website, you can also find a recession planning toolkit as well. So you're going to be toolkit up. If you want to do a strategic plan right now, there's everything that you need there to help you address all the issues that you might have. I'd also just, I can see we could do with just one or two more votes. So if you haven't yet voted, there we go. Thank you for whoever just voted. I'll let Joanne.
Right. No, that's great. Thank you, Judith. I'll let you take it from here, but it's great to see that half of you have this process underway. That's fantastic. I think for a very long time, the idea of having a strategic plan in the law department was not something that was regularly done. And it's fantastic to see that so many of you have this underway already. Thank you very much for sharing.
And a big thank you, Joanne, and please, if anyone else wants to express their thanks in the chat, it would be lovely if you would do that. But thank you very much for another great session and incredible practical ideas and insights for everyone to take away. If anyone wants to make a comment or ask a question, then feel free to come off mute, or obviously Joanne is available after today if you want to reach out to her directly or connect with her on LinkedIn, that would also be great. Just a bit of a plug for our upcoming client experience webinars. Next week, we have a session on the metaverse. So if you're not all across that yet, if you're even struggling to know what it means, whether it's got meaning for your particular organization, then next week's session is for you, as everything will be demystified for you. And then coming up is a really, really good session for your team. So if you've got other team members that are not yet part of this client experience program, reach out to them, because that session helps you look at your personality profile and your preferences and how that might impact the others that you work with. So a really interesting dialogue that you can then have with your team if they all join, because you can all do it in real time and look at then what it means for you. So another great session coming up. I hope you've enjoyed today. As always, please get in touch if you need anything, want anything, would like to share anything. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, hopefully we'll see you again next week.
Well,
Thank you very much, everyone.
Judith, before we close, and if I can do it in less than 90 seconds, we have 2 quick questions. What advice do you have for those struggling on how to collect data about smaller interactions with the business? I would say it's not, in terms of collecting any data with interactions with the business, think about using small ways to pilot that sort of effort, whether it's that email address I talked about or collecting data through your team, thinking about grabbing a small function of the department and really focusing on that as a kickoff. That was a very quick answer. It was a much longer conversation. I'm happy to have that. Key tips for someone in a new legal department that has only 1 person. This is an amazing time for you to focus on these kinds of things, because you will probably grow quickly, or you at least have, you might be bringing in new people. So understanding, how you want to interact with the business, now is the perfect time to do that. What is that you're going to be responsible for? What is your role as a department of one? And how will you integrate with the business is a perfect time. Now is a fantastic time for you to build that strategic plan and thinking through what does the road ahead look like, and how do you need to align resources to manage the expectations of the business. I hope I got it all. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time today.